Recording in progress.
It is 7 p.m. This is Thursday, July 27th. Second. Planning Commission meeting to order. I'll call the Planning Commission meeting to order. Mr. Eddie, Mr. Planning Manager, please call the roll. Here.
Here.
So we have a quorum with that. However, the Plan Commission and Unified Development Ordinance rules require 4 affirmative votes. In that case, the mayor will be voting on every item. With that, we have a quorum. Please rise and join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is approval of the regular meeting minutes of July 8th. Any additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. You just fixed this.
I'm off.
You're on. You're all on. So, okay. It's been moved and seconded for approval of the minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. With that, I'm going to skip item D1 for a moment. We'll move on to the site plan for Anthony D. Kraus and the A&T Kraus Agricultural Equipment Storage Building. Who's doing that one?
Yes.
Mr.
This is
Murphy.
yes, this is a site plan to allow for a new agricultural building. It's approximately 72 by 40. We will locate it on a agricultural property. So UDO requires site plan for agricultural properties. The location complies with all the setbacks. This was submitted in 2020, but was delayed because we need the wetland delineations. So we received the wetland delineation prepared by SewerPack, and the building location is far away from any of the wetlands on the property. So staff is recommending approval.
Question from Commissioner Leon.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution approving a site plan for construction of a storage building at 10233 West Oakwood Road.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Haley. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 4 ayes, no noes, 2 absent, no abstentions. Move back to item G1, which is MLG's division for potential future development. This is certified survey map. What did I see? G? Old habits die. This is matter D1. Mr. Martinez.
Yes, this is a certified survey map for a lot split on the business park, and this is a subject property. It's already served by city water, city sewer, have access to Oakwood Park Drive, so there's no right-of-way dedication. So we can see the 2 lots. One lot, 2.5 acres, the other lot, 5 acres. Both meets the minimum lot requirement in the PDD 18, that is 1 acre. We can see that the proposed lot line will be where there's this elevation change. So the location of the common lot line makes sense because this area will be difficult to develop anyway. With regards to natural resources, this is the Natural Resource Protection Plan. There are some wetlands on the property, 4 wetlands, but we have received the determination by the DNR that are exempt from permit for state permits. We also received the determination by the Army Corps that are not federal wetlands. So natural resource protection standards will not apply to these wetlands. However, there are some mature woodlands, and some shore buffer that will be protected by a conservation easement. In addition to that, there's a separate landscape buffer easement along the southern property line because these properties to the south are zone residential. Staff is recommending approval. This will go to CDA next week for Common Council on August 3rd for final decision.
Just a question, which is the lot that they have a prospect for, do you know?
This one, number 1.
Interesting. Any questions from the commissions? Commissioner Leon.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of a resolution conditionally approving a 2-lot certified survey map, being a redivision of Lot 2 of certified survey map number 8546, being a redivision of Outlot 1, Block 11 of the plat of Franklin Business Park Addition Number 1, and being part of the southwest quarter and southeast quarter of the southeast quarter of Section 26, Town 5 North, Range 21 East, City of Franklin, Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, MLG Development, Inc., generally east of the intersection of West Oakwood Park Drive and South 52nd Street in the city of Franklin Business Park.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Haley. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. 4 ayes, no noes, 2 absent, no abstentions. Move on to the fun item of the evening. And it is, well, okay, let's do the Parkland acquisition study first. This is D4. I would have said G4, but
Thank you, Mayor. Planner X here, and Alderwoman Hanneman is the other staffer working on this item. We have Jackie Mish from Vandewald here in the room with us, and then on the phone, I'm going to see if I can make it possible for him to participate, is Brian Munson from Vandewald. So Mr. Munson has a great deal of expertise on impact fees as well, and so we'd like to make sure that his expertise is in the room. So I would like to take a moment to just pop his little window out, if I can do that. Yeah.
And, well, that's because of the dynamic range of that camera. That's why his face is all blown out, because he's got windows on his right.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this publicly now. We no longer permit remote participation in meetings. So
Going forward, what do you want to do?
everybody is looking the other way tonight.
Thank you. Regulo, do you know how to make this off to one side?
I just shared the screen.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
His head is in the way. Sorry. Yeah. There we go. Brian, now we can see you and the presentation. Can you see the
Well, thank you.
presentation?
Yes, I can see everything. Thank you.
Okay. He's muted right now. Okay.
Try it again, Brian.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Try it again, Brian.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Much better. Well, thank you for accommodating tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So I just want to take a moment to introduce the item. This Parkland acquisition study it's before you now as an input session. This item came before you for an update a few months ago. This is a plan for the use of park impact fees based on the recommendations of the Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. So just as you, the Plan Commission, oversee the implementation of the Comprehensive Master Plan, there's also a plan for the recreational facilities in the city, which is in some ways entwined with that master plan. It is specific to a specific part of the city's overall revenue stream. Impact fees are a fee that is assessed on new homes, and that fee is intended to pay for the future uses that those new residents will want. In this case, parks. It also applies to libraries, fire and other law enforcement. And there's a number of other areas where this applies, sewer, water use, that kind of thing. So in 2021, the per dwelling unit fee is $1,909 per dwelling unit. Unless it's a multifamily home, then the fee is slightly less. So this project that we're undertaking now is, in a sense, a thought experiment about how to use those fees as we do 2022 budgeting, capital improvement planning over the long term, and also implement the corp. So those things are all interrelated. So just as a thought experiment, there will be some concept reviews with 385 single-family units. That's a potential assessment of $700,000 plus that
For
could
parks.
just for parks. That's correct. So there would be other fees assessed for other services, but assume that all of those units are built, that could potentially be 1 year's intake of impact fees. And those fees must be spent in a certain period of time. Jackie's going to get more into the details of how that timing works. And in Franklin, we have a little bit of a unique situation with that, but I wanted to lay the groundwork so that you're understanding that this thought experiment is informing the budgeting process. So Vandewald has been tasked with producing a strategy report. This information was in your previous presentation on this, but generally speaking, they're producing a prioritization tool with geographic focus areas and a generalized timeline of potential park or trail acquisitions so that you can make decisions as a city about how to expend those fees. Bearing in mind that until the amenities that are described in the corp have been fully built out, those fees will continue to be assessed. So this is looking in some ways over a time horizon of a great many years potentially, but the report is going to be that tool. So just a reminder of the types of parks. This is also going to be in Ms. Mish's presentation, but there's lots of different scales. The city has been pretty good at building smaller and mid-sized parks and producing amenities for those, but trails and other amenities, there's some decisions that need to be made and priorities that need to be set. So, and then how this all fits together, the city undertakes an annual budgeting process. Many of the impact fees that are on hand at this time must be spent in 2022, and there's another discussion separate from this one that is occurring about how to allocate the 2022 impact fees, but it is informing this discussion. So some of that has been happening at the same time, and there may be some differences between dollar amounts that you're seeing on the capital side and the 2022 budget side and what's in the draft study, but that's because we're trying to do three things at once. So please forgive some differences, but the 2022 budget also fits into a 5-year capital plan that's being developed by the administrative staff, and then the parkland acquisition study is informing all of that. So this is kind of a general sense of the timeline and scale. And if Alderwoman Hanneman has anything she'd like to add, that's my introduction to this item, so.
Is that on? Okay. I want to thank Marion, who's been my partner and guide and being the lead staff on this particular project. A lot of time, thought has gone into this, and I want to thank Jackie Mish and Brian Munson up there, who have really done a great job of leading us through this project as well. And what you have before you, although it's a draft, it's what maybe the third or fourth iteration of our drafts that we've gone through in the past couple of months. A great deal of thought has been put into this. The city administrator, Ms. Stino, has also been extremely helpful, as has Mr. Rotzenberg, our Director of Finance, particularly in helping us to map out our planned spends and how we can use those impact fees, and seeing how it relates back to what were the options that we're putting forth in this particular draft. So that being said, I want to reiterate, we are here primarily as a status update, but we do hope to get some feedback. because this will go back to the Parks Commission again. We're going to, keep working and fine tuning this, and we'll ultimately bring it back probably in mid-September for final approval. But the hope is that the information we have put in this study, along with the finances that have been put together by administration, that will make the budgeting process a little bit easier. Coming up with the money, maybe not, but at least knowing what we need to spend in the parks and going forward over the next few years. And something I said at Common Council the other night about this, I think it's so important that we have this particular plan, so when all of these new homes are built and people come in and they pay their impact fee, we have an answer when they say, what do you use these impact fees for? What are you going to do with this? And so we can hand them this and say, we've given this a great deal of thought, and these are the priorities that are outlined in our corp. But this is the plan that we want to use to implement and hopefully see it through. So that being said, I will turn it over to Jackie Mish, who will lead us through the report and the presentation.
Jackie, excuse me 1 second. I do have to make a point, and I think I'm going to do it this way. I want to offer the Parks Commission my apology, because there's been some confusion, some disconnect, and some conflicting ideas coming from me, some members of the administration, the aldermen, and a little bit from the Plan Commission. So they're feeling a little frustrated. I do want, I'm going to say it on the record so that they can hear it, and I'm going to tell them personally, their input and their guidance on this is very important. Unfortunately, at this time, there's a lot of moving parts, and we'll talk about a couple tonight, that are happening in all kinds of different circles. So they're caught in the middle, and so is Vanderwall, actually. So I apologize to them, and I recognize their frustration and ask them to bear with us, and Vanderwall to bear with us, because I may even throw a couple of wrenches in tonight. So with that, Jackie, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. We will be as prepared as possible to dodge any wrenches that may come our way. So this evening, I'd like to just provide an overview of what's in our draft parkland acquisition strategy, including the goals for parkland acquisition, initial strategy that we've developed, provide a little background on impact fees and matching funds, and then introduce our preliminary timeline and recommendations, but really do want to leave most time this evening for discussion with the members of the Plan Commission. So beginning with acquisition goals, when we began this project, we first looked at the city's comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. When it comes to parkland acquisition, so buying land for parks, the Corp recommends a new regional or multi-community park located on the southwest portion of the city. Naturally, that makes sense. That's where the city is planning to grow. The Corp also suggests exploring opportunities to develop that park adjacent to or thinking about the county-owned Franklin Savannah in that portion of the city. The other points here, the Corp acknowledges that there are limited options to establish new neighborhood parks in already developed neighborhoods, and so recommends working with the school district on developing new active recreation facilities for new school sites as a way to kind of get more recreation facilities in existing neighborhoods. And then finally, the Corp also mentions establishing several mini parks of at least 1 acre within developed areas of the city. We didn't focus on that as part of our study just because the very small parks doesn't really solve the immediate need of bending down the park impact fee balance. So we work closely with the Parks Commission to review those Corp goals and recommendations, and then based on the Parks Commission experience with seeing how the park system operates and hearing from the public, they wanted to provide some additional goals to consider as we develop this strategy. So working with the Parks Commission, we confirmed that their goals involve a new community park or neighborhood park. And that park should include both active and passive recreation. So when we say active, we're thinking usually like sports, play fields, sports, things like that. And passive recreation could include walking trails, nature, viewing, things like that. They also expressed a desire to connect all of the existing parks where possible with trails. So a goal of connecting the whole park system with recreation trails. And then also they identified several different facilities that might be desirable in the park system that we don't currently have. Ice skating, dog amenities, pickleball, a few others. So when we think about acquiring land for parks, based on the input from the Parks Commission, it was agreed upon that generally 20 acres or more would be desirable for such a park. The agreement that that park should be located in the southwest portion of the city. And we discussed opportunities related to locating that park adjacent to the Franklin Savannah or adjacent to the future conservation lands that'll become part of the city from the waste management lands. So opportunities to really leverage the existing open space that you have right now. We also discussed Ryan Creek as a great potential for trail connections, also runs through a portion of that Franklin Savannah land too. And then finally, there was strong support for additional trail connections wherever priority may be. So from here, we've developed a loose parkland acquisition strategy. This graphic, although not very easy to read on the slide, is available in the draft report. The purpose of this graphic is to really just summarize the language that is in the report right now. And we're really trying to express that this is an iterative process. This is something that you would revisit every time fees are spent. We would want to revisit this process and kind of do this continually. And it's really showing how the city should approach its park impact fees. The idea is that by using this strategy, you would have a multi-year plan for how to use parkland, park impact fees, what land you need to acquire, where you need parkland improvements now and in the future. So the idea is that you continually use this process to have a clear roadmap for the future. So it's definitely more of a proactive approach to considering how to use those parkland impact fees or park impact fees. So the first step in that process is a three-step process is fund analysis. So understanding what park impact fees do we have available right now. So we recommend having a good understanding on what funds are expiring soon and what funds are expiring a bit further out. In this case, the next batch of funds that aren't necessarily accounted for would be expiring in 2024. So kind of prioritizing those versus those expiring after that date. Next would involve developing a plan for utilizing our short-term, our funds that are be expiring in the short term, and then identifying a plan for reserving or using funds that don't expire immediately. The second step is to develop more detailed plans about what we should do with the park impact fees. So develop kind of a general concept or program for a specific park that may have been identified. Does that park need active or passive recreation or both? What types of facilities might be included in that park? And generally, how many acres are we looking at? Additionally, this is the time when you might start thinking about ways to leverage the funds that you do have. So partnering with the school district, looking for grant opportunities to make your dollars go further, some sort of public-private partnership to kind of maximize the investment that you're making. And then finally, step 3, this is when you actually start beginning to acquire the land now that you've done all that legwork. So for this process, because we do know our immediate priority is opportunities in the southwest portion of the city, you'd want to start investigating actual land in the southwest quadrant, begin outreach to those property owners to discuss their willingness to participate, acquire the property that you have your eye on, And concurrently, or after, actually installing parkland improvements in either that park or in existing parks, depending on what your strategy is. So again, this is just kind of a framework of a process for the city to have a guide to having a plan for parkland acquisition and park improvement. So just wanted to provide a little bit of information about park impact fees and the match that's required. I think Marion's explanation was really excellent. So I won't spend too much time on this, but basically the intention of park impact fees is really to offset the impact of adding new residential dwelling units to the city and the new population that comes with that. And as Marion said, those are assessed per dwelling unit. Eligible projects, this is established, impact fees are established in state statutes, and what impact fees can be used on are laid out in state statutes. And so real generally that includes parkland acquisition, planning for parkland acquisition or park development, and then new improvements to parks that serve that new population. In Franklin, there is typically a match component to using park impact fees. This is because the park impact fee can really be only used for the % of the park project that serves the new population. And typically a park project is bigger than the discrete new population that's been added. So as a result, only a certain % of any type of park project is eligible for park impact fee use. As a result, most projects do require some sort of match to be paired with the impact fee. It could come from the general fund, it could come from other sources. So that usually any park project is a combination of park impact fees and other funding sources. So this is an important slide that we will probably return to. And these are two tables summarizing what types of park projects are eligible, or what % of different park projects are eligible for park impact fees. These percentages are laid out in the city's impact fee study that was just updated in March of 2020. So as you can see in the table, both tables, the % really varies depending on the type of park project you're looking at. So on the left side of the screen, the % eligible for park projects that are included in the city's corp are depicted here. As you can see, community parks generally do have a lower % eligible, only 36% of a community park would be eligible for park impact fees. So the remaining percentage needs to be matched by the city. On the other hand, neighborhood parks are up to 47%. So this really drives our strategy in developing scenarios and a spending plan, because the match really depends on the % that's eligible. On the right side of the screen, you'll see that we have different percentages for projects that are not in the city's corp. Neighborhood parks are eligible for 80% and mini parks 100% eligible.
And when you say NA, what does NA mean?
I guess it could also say 0.
That's 0 because a community park isn't contemplated as a new project? Or is it because we can't spend money on it?
In the corp, it identifies a community park in the southwest corner of the community. So in essence, it's already been planned. And so there's not a justification for a second community park in this area per the corp. So that's why it's at 0.
Okay, I get that. Special parks, however, are special for a reason. And they would not necessarily be part of the corp. So is NA there because we haven't thought of a special need yet?
I think it is the same situation, that there are some discussion of special park amenities. And I think in the corp that those flow to some of the existing parks rather than creating a new park for it. And so because it was previously planned, not to the degree that it's designed and identified, but that's kind of the break between things that were not anticipated in the corp versus things that have been already identified for expenditures in the corp. And the reason it's set up that way largely is the corp becomes the element that is used for the park impact fee ordinance. And so the ordinance responds to what's in the corp, and then the justification for the impact fee also responds to it as well. So again, much like Marion was saying, some of these layer together in fairly complex little ways, but all three of those elements come together towards setting the ability to spend fees that have been charged at set ratios based upon the justification that the new resident is creating the need for the park facility.
And this will be a Marion question. The date on the corp is what?
So the date on the cover of the document is 2011. The corp was amended and updated to go through 2030 in 2015.
And it was written in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not expecting you to answer this. What is the percentage of the corp that was updated in 2011?
The items that were updated in 2011, it's an iterative process, and I'm not totally sure what was added. In 2015, a single park was added and some lineal foot of trail. So
The subtle thing I'm trying to get at is the corp is old, the corp is out of date, the corp represents ideas from 2005 with a couple of tweaks in 11 and 15. We're hanging our hat on a plan that's 15 years old, which is absolutely insane, but where we're at. But I say that so that we keep that in mind, and Vanderwall as well, as we move forward on where to spend money. And we'll talk about the Southwest Park in a little bit. So I just want to let everybody have a perspective. A 15-year-old document is telling us what today is. So, Jackie, sorry. Commissioner Haley.
Just a quick question on the exhibit. Included in corp, not in corp, what does that designate? So if it showed up on the original one as a finite thing, it was included, but what if it just said future park or something? I'm trying to understand the distinction between the two.
Jackie, if you could go to slide 34 in the presentation, that has the map that illustrates where all of the plans, where the existing parks are, service areas, and where the plans were. And the way the corp is put together is it looks at service areas for different levels of parks. So obviously community parks serving the entire community, neighborhood parks, which are the smaller circles here, serving a smaller geographic area, again, thinking about who's most likely to use them. And so some of the recommendations in the corp were saying things like we've already stated earlier, is that it's difficult to build a new park, obviously, in areas that are already developed. So it's looking at areas where there's going to be new growth. So Jackie, if you step forward one more slide, you can see this is now the same corp boundaries overlaid on the adopted comprehensive land use plan, so the future land use map, illustrating where there's commercial in red and residential in yellow. And so what the corp is trying to do in making the recommendations for new parks, and this is where that first part of that chart was saying, as growth occurs, it's going to trigger more need for expansion of parks beyond the service area of the existing parks. And so you see a circle in the southwest corner. That black dash circle is around the Franklin Savannah Park, for example.
That's right.
Yep. And so you see a lot of residential areas that don't fall within the service area of any neighborhood level parks. And so the corp has language that makes recommendations saying, as you grow, you'll trigger more need. So it's trying to make recommendations specifically in the southwest corner of the community to accommodate that need, and projecting and planning for things such as a new community park in this area. I think the intent there was really to talk about the recreational facilities necessary to support the community, because Franklin Savannah is largely a conservation park at this stage. But it also makes recommendations that you would have neighborhood park needs. And so that's the differential. In the corp, it says you will need to acquire and develop certain types of parks that go in line with the development of your community. So that's where the in the corp section comes from. It's recommendation to build and acquire new facilities in support of that residential base. There is a category for not anticipating the corp because, like most plans, occasionally things come along that weren't anticipated, and then that allocates what happens if you identify something that wasn't in the corp for an area. How do you allocate funds for that? And again, all of that goes back to the park impact fee ordinance, and the study that supports that ordinance is based upon the corp. And Mayor, as you said, the challenge being it is based on a 2005 plan that has been updated, but largely it's informed by geography as well. So service areas are set by distance to a park, and as the community grows, these new areas are further and further from those park service areas.
And as I look at this particular map, as we'll all come to hear in the next month or two, this, all residential.
No parks.
This, well, most of this is all residential. This will be all residential. And it won't be long before this fills out. And
So
Commissioner Hilly, please.
that all makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So the stuff that's included in the corp in that previous exhibit was the stuff we were looking at. So if something new comes up and we say, hey, we'd like to build one in the southeast, that's what's in the category of not currently. That's the way the other percentages apply.
Yeah, I would,
So if it's shown here, we're locked into the first column of percentages, basically.
that's a good way to say that.
Correct.
We're not going to see all 34 slides, are we?
No, I have a whole bunch of extra bonus slides in case questions like this pop up. So don't worry.
Yes, no, we don't have to go. We won't go through all of them. We just have them in case we need them.
Yep, exactly. So I'm sure many of you are, I don't really need to say this, but there is kind of a backwards incentive to implementing the corp based on these percentages. So we will kind of discuss that more. So impact fee time limits, I'm trying to keep this simple because I think it can get complicated quickly, but basically state statutes require that municipalities spend the impact fees within a reasonable amount of time. Otherwise, they have to be rebated back to the current owner of the property. This is something most municipalities try to avoid for a lot of reasons.
Can I interrupt on that one? My understanding is that it's not rebated to the current owner of the property. It has to be rebated to the person who paid it.
It's a kind of up for debate and very difficult to discern. I grabbed that language from the statutes, but it's not something anybody wants to spend time figuring out.
And I know that our Director of Finance is very much advising against having to go through
Yeah, we're
that
not-
process.
Yeah, I can come up with a lot of reasons why
Yeah.
you'd want
It
to.
gets,
So I
it
just
gets
wanted to
complicated in a
clarify
hurry.
On this kind of stuff, let me take a quick poll. Anybody not familiar with how impact fees work? Okay, so we can skip these.
So basically, I'll just say that currently the city uses an 8-year spending period for impact fees. So fees being collected today, fees that were collected a few years ago are on an 8-year timeline. So this is a modified version of a table that is included in the draft report in your meeting packet that lays out funds expiring by year. Funds actually expire in each month of each year, but we've just summarized them to keep it simple. We're showing $0 in the 2022 row. There are funds expiring in 2022, but my understanding is that there are plans being made for those funds as we speak. So for the purposes of this conversation, I put a 0 in that row so that the total at the bottom of that column is closer to the dollar amount that we need to make a spending plan for right now. So currently, this table is showing that about over $2.3 million will be expiring by the end of 2028. So that's the bucket of funds that we are looking at right now. Obviously, the city is going to continue, as Marion said, collecting fees. So that's why it's important to continually update this thought process. Any questions on this before I move on? All right, so here's where we've developed preliminary timelines for spending the fees. Before I dive into those, I just wanted to share some takeaways. As I said before, it's over 2.3 million that we're hoping to have a plan for. Those expire at the end of 2028. There are sufficient fees available to purchase a large parcel of land that meets the goals we described before. So if we have funds to purchase some parkland in the southwest quadrant of the city. As I mentioned, the match requirement does create difficulty because it's not just writing a check, but it's coming up with the match requirement so that you can write the check. And then, as we discussed, the percent eligible really impacts the direction the city may wish to take.
Another thing I would add before we jump into the scenarios is what we tried to do as we went through these was to illustrate as many of the different possible scenarios that could be included, both what does the corp talk about and what are some other scenarios that were not anticipated in the corp. We wanted to try to illustrate and present all of those, not in a ranked order. We recognize that the match requirements for some of these are significant, and wanted to make sure that we're illustrating that without discounting any of them. But we recognize that some of them, quite honestly, are probably financially infeasible. But we did want to make sure that you had an illustration for the different iterations that could address the compiled fees and different avenues to spend it. So this is kind of that point where we're really looking for input to kind of have conversations about all these different scenarios. But again, we recognize that some of these have a very significant match component. And in other communities, typically the way that has been addressed has been either through a long-term budgeting strategy that has identified a need for a large-scale facility and then budgeting over multiple years. But then in all certainty, sometimes that just isn't financially feasible given the challenges that we're all going through currently with COVID and impact on budgets. So again, we wanted to illustrate all the different scenarios and present them for discussion without prioritization, without taking some ones out that we think obviously won't work, but tried to then also present some that bring that match down as much as possible by trying to allocate them to different facilities that utilize a higher threshold of park funds as opposed to grant matching funds from the general funds.
So I've just kind of summarized the scenarios on these two slides, and then if anyone would like to discuss a specific one, if we want to pull up the report, we do have that ability to do that too. But these first 6 scenarios are or not prioritized, as Brian said, but these are the scenarios that implement the corp. So again, that is a community park on the southwest side of the city. We did provide a first scenario that was just trails only. But you can see on the slide here, we also have a version with a 30-acre community park, 80-acre community park, an option to improve the waste management property as a community park, and then different combinations of community parks with trails or implementing a neighborhood park. Brian, did you want to add anything before we move on to this one?
No, other than to say, again, the way these interweave, the project costs come out of the impact fee study as well. So it made some assumptions in, what the parks what the cost would be associated with each of the types of parks. And then we also tried to allocate funds for where we're talking about land acquisition, trail improvement, those kind of things. But again, those are informed by the park study, the impact fee study.
Yep, so the numbers again are in the actual report document in your packet. And as we said, they're very conceptual numbers, but are based on the study. And then I should mention too that we did make an assumption of $40,000 per acre for land acquisition. Obviously, that's just a placeholder until you have a real project in hand.
Yep.
The target
And it gives,
you're aiming at for this is the $2 million spend for 2028?
So the scenarios in the report as it is includes the 2.2 million that expire in 2022. So it's about 3.5 million is the assumption in these scenarios. As you can see, they are pretty variable. They're not hitting that 3.5 on the head. So I think all of these scenarios are still all valid for discussion, regardless, despite the fact that those 2022 funds might be accounted for.
The other thing about the acquisition price, just to explain, that's based off of what's on the market roughly today. The numbers have not been updated since the report was issued the first time, but it was a range from roughly $11,000 for entirely wetlands up to around $55,000, and that's largely influenced by the developability of the parcel, along with what the land use designation was in the comprehensive plan.
I'm going to move us on to the next slide. These next set of scenarios are, well, what if we diverged from the corp and pursued projects that had a higher percent eligibility for park impact fees and then a lower match requirement of the city? So in this case, you can see that we have an option where we do a new 25-acre neighborhood park. So a neighborhood park is defined by the corp as a smaller park, serves one or more neighborhoods, but isn't usually kind of in the 25-acre range or smaller, isn't necessarily serving the whole city. We also have a an option that includes trails in a 25-acre neighborhood park, an option that includes trails, improving an existing, a new neighborhood park, and adding a new neighborhood park. And then finally, J is improve a neighborhood park and then add a new 25-acre neighborhood park. So all three different options, again, kind of working with that relatively lower match requirement for these options.
And there is a scenario K,
There's always a scenario, okay.
but this one's coming from the guy in the middle seat. And it would sit on this page because of its divergence from the corp. It would include trails. It would include a new community park. And by the way, I hate the definitions in the corp because they're used as leverage, which is entirely inappropriate. But anyway, because the reality is they're all city parks and they're all used by everybody's neighbors. So neighborhood park, community park, no difference in my mind. So at any rate, and we can dig in a little bit more on the Mike scenario K. I'm just suggesting that there is a scenario K that's not on this piece of paper.
Yeah, I should have said that. We are free to make more scenarios, pull different pieces of scenarios, go through the whole alphabet if we care to.
I always wanted to say that. What's next?
Discussion.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
So there you go.
So I've put some questions here just to kind of prompt the discussion, but please take this wherever you wish to go. I thought it might be easy to start with what scenarios are most desirable, kind of get the conversation started.
You want to go first?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd like to remind everybody of, because you may not be aware of this, but I think this is great that we're trying to figure out a strategy to spend the money and spend it wisely. But when you start looking to other sources for matching funds, be they grants, whatever, they all come with strings attached. It is not free money. The strings go on forever. They require building to standards higher than we might normally. They require compliance with established standards. And you have to maintain it as such for forever. And there's accounting and other things. So it's important to do this. And there's great grant programs out there. I've worked with most of them. They're there. But we need to remember that there are costs associated with this. It's not free money. There will be additional levels of maintenance and reporting over the years that needs to be done, and restrictions on what else you can't do in that parkland or surrounding areas. So there's strings on everything. And they're great opportunities, but we need to be smart about that and budget accordingly in our operations budgets, because operation budgets are one of the things that will kill parks. I know something about that.
And if I may follow up, Commissioner Haley, my understanding also is with the usage of the impact fees, if some of the cost match is provided by a grant, that also lowers the amount of matching money we can use. So it's a double-edged sword in that regard, too. Well, yeah, I think each individual opportunity will have to be evaluated of its own accord and cost benefit.
This is the start of that.
Alderwoman Hanneman reminds me of an issue I went around and around with Marion on today. On the draft report, page 3, step 2, section 2, I found the wording confusing. Specifically, the sentence that says, grant funds or partner funds cannot be used to reduce the city's required matching funds. That's,
Yeah,
Brian, let me finish.
sure.
That implies that the money that you attract as a matching fund cannot reduce the city's amount of contribution. That is incorrect. The percentage never changes, but the amount designated changes and has an impact. So Marion has some suggested language on that. You got to be, as I now am saying a lot, Alderwoman Hanneman, words have meaning. You got to read the words and see what they mean. And I'm not chastising you. It's just become a common problem these days. That gets very confusing, especially since the next sentence says impact fees can be used as a match as required by a grant program. So, which is it? So Marion's got some suggested language. But it's important to note that in all discussions we have with developers coming through the door, it's where's the park? What are you going to donate to as park project? Where's the trails going to go? So that land, that value comes at a high price because the land is contemplated immediately for development, and that changes the dollar amount. That bumps 11 grand up to maybe 30 grand for an unusable piece of dirt to maybe 110 grand for a developable piece of land. So we're playing with all of these things, but anyway, Kevin, I'll ask you. Is that it for now?
Well, just the other thought I have is there we go. I concur with you that we need to revisit the corp, because that's one of the concerns I have, that it truly reflect what we're doing and our goals moving forward, and things have changed geographically in the city and a lot. So I think it makes sense to revisit that. And the other thing that kept popping up in my mind as I was going through all this is, what are the criteria that we're going to use for acquisition? Right now, we're using the logic of the corp said we should have something in the southwest. But we'll revisit that, we'll look at it, but what piece is it and where should it be? And what are the criteria? Are we looking for areas with natural resources on them? And it'll change by park, but that's I think an important thing that needs to be revisited and defined moving forward with a corp update. I guess I'll also share that for those that aren't aware, the corp is an essential component of just about any grant program you apply for. They want to see a current active corp that this is in compliance with. It's one of the first check boxes.
Here's a scenario for discussion. What would happen to this plan if by some hook or crook or magical potion, let's say 160 acres became available in the middle of the city?
We would have to amend the existing corp.
I guarantee you that'll take all of about 20 seconds. But go ahead.
So, and then I wonder if the consultants could also weigh in on how that would, because we'd be altering the location of a community park. So it would be something that was not contemplated in the existing corp, but the scale of the park was.
Well, let me jump in. We have a Southwest Community Park because the mayor at the time thought that was a great location for it. Did we hit the button? Did I?
Yeah, we got called for no more.
The flap was open, so I closed it, so maybe
That's okay, everything's all good here?
we're good, thanks.
Debatable.
Now, this is important though, because now we know it works. Thanks, sorry about that.
Good on the caption.
And my view on large parks that serve the entire city is they should serve the entire city, not our neighboring city. And I also want to know is, have we considered that's kind of, anyway, have we considered the requirements that go along and are attached to the MMSD land? Because I'll tell you, we can't do anything with the Franklin Savannah. So co-locating a park to the Franklin Savannah might be nice for educational purposes, but for park use, you'll have more information on that. That was my
Clarity,
belief.
the Franklin Savannah is a Milwaukee County park, and it's
Correct.
technically called Franklin Park, the name for it, but it contains the Franklin Savannah, which is a
Right, exactly.
ecosystem.
Yep.
But that has nothing to do with MMSD. That's land that the county acquired through grant programs and can never sell or do anything except what they told them they were going to do. So to acquire lands around it is an excellent opportunity.
Okay. But we don't know I don't think we know what the requirements are for the MMSD lands.
If I may, are you referring to the waste management lands that are
Excuse
under
me,
an
I
easement?
apologize. Yes, the waste management.
Correct. So the terms of the easement, I would have to review it more closely, but it does allow for some trails but it is intended to be a conservancy.
So that kind of, playgrounds and ball fields and things like that are probably not what's intended. So here, this is why I objected to that corp when I came out. It was the dream, and I have dreams and I put dreams in action, right? That's my job. Similarly, my predecessor had dreams and put them into action. But now we get hindsight 2020 and we look at tens of, almost hundreds of acres of park can't use for what we need to use it for. I just put that out there, but there may be two opportunities in the next 5 years in the center of the city for either, how big is Franklin? 80 acres or something twice that size. What would happen if that came about? Yeah. And we don't contemplate all that. We're stuck in the corp says. The corp is a piece of junk, just like our unified development order. Although now we're handcuffed because it is what it is, right? So
If I may, it sounds like you do support generally the idea of a large community park, but the location.
absolutely correct. Well stated.
So the corp is driving the assessment of the fees, but that means that we're accumulating fees that meet that need. So then we have to figure out how to get the planning in line with the finance.
Right.
So,
Alderwoman Hanneman.
So Mayor, if I can understand a little more deeply what you're getting at is because if theoretically that community park were to move to the center of the city, that would be in lieu of a large park in the southwest portion of the city, and those neighborhoods would remain unserved unless those developers put in a mini park within that particular development. But they would not have access to a larger area of recreation.
Similarly,
Outside of a mini park.
Most of your constituency on the east side of your district doesn't have a large facility either. That's why a big city park belongs in the big city middle, not in the edges. That's why Southwest.
I guess what I'm asking
Never
is,
made
would
any
you also advocate for a more mid-sized, quote-unquote, neighborhood park in the
Yeah,
southwest corner
Of course.
of the city.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And we'll potentially have the waste management plans for that purpose, but then we need to see a spot where we can park some play equipment and a ball diamond, tennis court and pickleball. And, yeah. Marion, can you put up a map of the city? You go to the city website maybe?
I have, like, as a future land use map, will that
I'm
work?
taking over here. I encourage everybody to have input on this because,
And Mayor, if I could just jump in for a quick second.
of course,
To some extent, scenario I is a thought along that lines. That instead of trying to build a community park in the southwest corner, building a neighborhood park would offer the opportunity for active recreation, would come with a higher utilization of the existing fees that's tied directly to the growth on the periphery of the community, and a lower city match requirement. The thought there could be that, leveraging the exactly what you were saying. We've got a lot of conservation opportunities down here between the county and the waste management lands. But if you could partner a smaller park immediately adjacent to those conservation parks and call it a neighborhood park that is the active rec, you've really hit the home run. That you've then created the opportunity for both leveraging the larger conservation lands with a smaller active park that utilizes funds and addresses the need in that area. And then you could look at, other opportunities to expend, funds. Because again, the funds are kind of a reoccurring basis. As all this growth happens, it will continue to accumulate over time. And then, as you said, looking into the corp and evaluating, is there an opportunity, more centrally located that could then become that community park, and trying to figure out how much, of the park fees could be utilized to implement that would be a worthwhile effort to kind of, as you're looking at the corp, thinking about, well, not just what does the plan show, but how are we going to pay for it? and what facilities could we pay for with park impact fees, and what facilities could we pay for with other matching funds?
and I assure you, Brian, how do we pay for it is usually the first thing out of my mouth. And you and I are a 100% agreement. You can't see it, Brian, but this land right here, that should be the Savannah if this is Oakwood Road.
The Savannah is the striped.
Oh yeah, okay. So I was close.
Yes.
So, yeah, this would be a great parcel to have. It just so happens that right now, got a proposal for this for, I want to say 70 houses.
Over 100.
Oh, yeah, okay. Which is, you'll see it, the concept is just coming up. But the advantage to this is first of all, there's plans for a trail here, actually to go like that. Fortunately, we're working with a developer that believes in parks. So that's a good thing. This is the waste management parcels.
So, yep.
That's the waste management.
I actually have them.
It doesn't matter. It's all right. I'm just saying, there's opportunities here for regional parks. There's another proposal. Let me see where I'm at. But this parcel right here, and there's an interest by the developer for the center of that to be community amenity, whether he knows it or not, if you know what I'm saying. This would not be an appropriate spot for a large park, and I'm going to use word large and bigger being in here, a large being something like this, and this would be a smaller park. This would not be appropriate for a larger because what's right here? City of Muskego. We don't build parks for the neighboring communities. So anyway, hey, Kevin, you and I we are together, man.
Done this before.
And the other issue we have is down here. There's no parks down here. And the Vanderwald folks and I talked about, there's no parks down here. There's no development down there at the moment, but, you know, right here, this is a big old business park. But there's lots of land in here. We just don't own it. So there's an opportunity there. So Brian, we got places to spend money. We just want to do it smart.
Well, and I think that this is the kind of feedback that Parks Commission really needs to know, and the kinds of things that you're envisioning or hearing and having conversations about. A little side note about your
Bombshell?
no, it's not a bombshell. A suggestion of the possibility of a park in the middle of the city, which would be wonderful in my personal opinion, but I think that would really offer some good opportunity to partner with our school district. And I have several thoughts on that.
Right.
That might pan out, but I think that would be a nice opportunity for some partnership.
So let me finish off the hypothetical. The reality is the city of Franklin is financially well-run, and I'm not bragging on me, I'm bragging on our staff. Financially well-run, we positioned ourselves that we can have these substantive conversations and talk about multi-million-dollar purchases and investments. We are unique. We are unique at this level. Most other cities did not have that ability. And I encourage everybody to look at who owns a lot of land in the city. And nor does higher levels of government have any money. I'm just going to make the prediction that in 5 years, Milwaukee County will be out of the parks business. That's why I look at Fleming as a possibility.
Most of that stuff's got restrictions. They can't sell it.
They don't need to sell it.
Just reminding you.
They don't need to sell it. So these are all opportunities that we need to open our minds to and consider. Now, are these 10%, 50%, 90% chances of happening? They're well below the 50 at this point, but at least we gotta put them on the horizon.
But I'd also like to make the argument that with the rapid growth coming in the southern, southwestern portion of the city, I think it's very important that we make the decision that if we do want parcels down there, if we do want to make a park, then we're going to need to act sooner than later in acquiring that property, because it's going to be gone sooner than
And
later.
more expensive.
Well, and not
They don't want
and more expensive, but the other things too that in terms of financing some of these park purchases, would we want to entertain the notion of borrowing money, since it's basically free right now? You know, and then paying that off with some park impact fee money over the future years, rather than waiting and buying it piecemeal. You know, when we're looking at interest rates probably going up again in the next 24 months. You know, and that's kind of an aside to what this is, but I think this exercise is important for making us think about what land we do want to acquire for these purposes, and is it more prudent to acquire it sooner than later? I don't have that singular answer right now as we sit here today, but I think it's an important discussion.
Well, and you're absolutely correct. That's an important conversation to have, because doing an investment in land that we believe in our hearts and in our minds is a good piece of parkland, buying it now and not spending money on something that's somewhat questionable is much more prudent than saying, my favorite statement, the corp says, or the UDO says, I don't care, it doesn't make any sense. So I agree with you 100%. And as you know, administration agrees that way too.
I would just want to add too that this isn't, just looking at this map here, you can see that the southwest portion of the city, you know, is really lacking service areas. And so we wouldn't want to completely walk away. I wouldn't recommend completely walking away from.
Oh, I hope you didn't believe what I was saying was walking away. My answer to this problem is to work with developers and current landowners where it makes sense to put a park and where it makes sense to properly size a park. Southwest, huge park, makes no sense to me, especially with the restrictions on the land that
Right.
anticipate to include.
Right.
Commissioner Leon.
So this is a topic where I am reminded that I'm endowed with 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that I would learn a lot from listening to Commissioner Haley and Alderwoman Hanneman. So generally speaking, I am going along with what Commissioner Haley is saying. A point of disagreement I have with you, Mr. Mayor, is on the concept that something to be for a large park would need to be in the center of the city. If it makes sense there, sure. And you kind of touched on why it might make sense. But I have no objection, again, generally speaking, to putting a park on the border with any neighboring community. It's still going to benefit the residents in Franklin. We're not talking about great distances. We're talking about a community that, for the most part, whatever park they're going to, are probably going to drive there. There are some exceptions to that, but for a large park. So I don't think that that would be something that would not be in the interest of Franklin residents if it were located, whether in the southwest portion, which it may not be because of some of the concerns, but I have no concerns with it being used by our neighbors. I think that's an appropriate use if it makes sense for the space, even if it just so happens to border Muskego or Oak Creek or wherever else. One thing that Alderman Hanneman brought up, excuse me, I don't know that I would be all that in favor of borrowing, even though interest rates are at historic lows. As a taxpayer and considering taxpayers around the city, I don't really have any issues with piecing it together over time and expanding out as needed. I think that that would be good financial stewardship, generally speaking. But again, for the most part, from everything I've heard, I'm pretty aligned with Commissioner Haley and would, for the most part, probably go along with his ideas. Mr. Mayor. And by the way, that royal we earlier with the Franklin officer, I think there's only one switch over here that could have set it off, and one person seated there. I believe it was did we set this off? I think that was the royal we.
Well, I was trying to avoid embarrassment.
I picked that up for you.
The reality is not many people know.
Thank you.
What are you here? Go ahead. Sorry,
Well,
newbie.
yeah. Well, I've only been here 7 weeks or so, this is, I've read through this stuff, so it's still relatively fresh, but I would say with what's already been brought up, I don't know that I have anything, majoring or differing to offer at this point.
How about it from a transportation perspective? Your background is in transportation.
Sure. Well, I think with what's going on with trails, trying to provide connectivity with any future park is obviously pretty important. So I guess a lot depends on what happens with the proposed trail projects right now. As Commissioner Haley saw one of them today on 116th Street. So, yeah. About it.
Okay, thank you. I found 2 errors on the, I found more than that, but I couldn't remember where the other one was. Page 13. Under staffing and maintenance. The third sentence. On approaches to consider, and then down farther, a suggestion. You say average Parks Department budgets 2017-21 supports roughly 251 acres of parkland. The budget impact, I'd like to know what the time frame is of that budget impact. It wasn't clear to me, but admittedly, I was reading it in the middle of 6 other things.
I'll make
Did we give you anything to work with?
Well, I heard that our second set of scenarios involving a neighborhood park on the southwest side, the direction that the commission wants to go, but I didn't hear much more detail among those different scenarios, and I can go back to those. Or if anybody else had any ideas they wanted to share.
I'm a big fan of parks in neighborhoods where they can go have a sandwich, sit at a park bench, maybe play a little basketball, fly their drones, fly a kite, whatever.
The kids do these.
A small playground, tot lot is what we used to call them. I'm a big fan of those because those get used a lot.
I think I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to focus more on the right mix rather than adhering to what's prescribed in the corp.
I agree with that.
And that if the right mix is not necessarily prescribed in the corp, that this body would be open to making the necessary remedy.
Do you agree with that statement? Right mix is more important than what's in the corp.
That's why you update the corp. You need to have one, you need to keep it current, and you need to follow it. And if it's not right, you change it. Well, you can't.
Okay. Important piece of information.
That's so sage. That's why he's got a beard.
It's sucking the energy out.
Kevin, you got something else?
Well, just another thought, and again, I don't want to, if we're committed to revisiting the corp, we go there, but usually it's a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, and usually the foundation is an inventory of what's out there. Not what does the city own, what does the county own? We've got 2 soccer clubs out there, we've got Franklin Little League, we've got all these other entities. So you look at all of the amenities and where they are, and then say, okay, what are we missing and where should it be? That's really the approach to take. There's no sense in rebuilding things just so you say you've got them. Understood that there's, reservations and requirements for who uses what and when, but that's sort of the way all parks are. And then I'll also share that everything we do should key off of Milwaukee County's park system, whether it exists or not in the future, that it was designed and is designed, and their plan reflects all of these things. So they don't have a problem with providing ball fields at Fleming Park and botanical gardens and all those things. Again, the cost is out there, but we don't need to do those things, and yet we can use them. So take a look, see what's out there, see what you need. I think the other key thing is, especially when we talk about the southwestern part of the city, it's low, it's wet. Doesn't maybe have all the development potential that people think it does. When they look and see all these farm fields, wow, it just may not happen. So one of the tricks that I learned is you start with those natural resources that we protect anyways, and look at those in relation to where existing parks and facilities are, and we're going to end up preserving those. Or in many cases, we've got developers that have large chunks of natural resources that they need to protect. They may be better off giving it to the city, improved the trail with whatever it is. So there's ways to make it work for everybody, I think. And it starts by taking a fresh, holistic look at the corp and studying the money part of it all so we don't lose and we've got enough when we need. I think, all things considered, in my years of experience, the most important thing about any park development is acquiring the land, the right land, quick. You can't get it later, once it's sold, once it's developed. So we should be targeting high-quality natural resource areas close by where we anticipate residential development. That's really the secret to coming up with a good system.
And that level of detail is a little outside of the scope of this particular plan, but I
That's what I- that's
absolutely
why-
hear what you're saying.
Upfront, it's,
Yeah.
these are things we need to think about as we revisit the corp. How do you get back to that plan that everybody can look at and say, now that makes sense? The mayor likes it too.
And if the city is, when the city is doing that, looking at the match requirement too, because I think that's under your control about setting where that, what percent that is and how you calculate that percent,
Of what
the
percent?
match percentage. So that's absolutely something I would recommend that you look at too.
Well, we do look at that, but it's part of the mix. It's not the overriding issue,
I guess
which is why we're on trails.
set the match requirement to reflect your
Right.
goals.
Right.
Mhm.
Excuse me, you said set your match to match your goal?
Make sure that when you're, that this table encourages you to implement your updated corp rather than discourages you. Because right now, the higher percentage eligible are for projects that are not in your corp.
Well, if I'm still sitting in this chair and this all comes about, my suggestion is the corp comes in, gets approved, and then the impact fee study gets revisited. Because the current impact fee study represented what's said in the corp and kind of what's happening today. You know, the fact, the special park was Kayla's Park, Kayla's Playground. We may very well come up with an idea where we need a special park that does nothing but pickleball or nothing but dogs.
Dogs playing pick-
Those,
Ice? Ice? You want to spend some money.
that's been one of my things.
It's very expensive.
Well, it depends on the fire department and a hose is one thing, but
We
anyway.
actually have an update on that at another time. But
So we look at all of those things, and relative to borrowing money today is really cheap. And we don't have levy caps on debt service. We have our internal controls on debt service, but if we did a capital spend, that's borrowed for. So what do you call it? And she's the finance person. She being respectfully Alderwoman Hanneman.
But I think there are other amenities that in 2005, to the point that the corp is old and out of date, and Parks Commission just received a request to install a cricket pitch in one of our parks. And that's a great idea. So where are we going to put that now? And what's the cost going to be? And how can we make that work? And, because that's something that I think can go a long way to making our community even more culturally inclusive. So these are the types of things that maybe weren't thought about in 2005 that we do need to look at with fresher eyes.
I would venture to say in city-owned parks, there's potentially 6 basketball courts. Maybe.
Got a whole lot of nice new basketball hoops over at Forest Park.
That's in the school district.
Well, it is, but it's part of the inventory.
I agree.
of it.
I agree.
Right.
Those happened last year, but
Yeah.
if you take that one out, maybe there's 4, maybe there's 6 total. But that's one thing that we're missing.
It's a point, though, yes.
We get St. Alphonsus youth football team practicing their football skills on the baseball diamond, or right on the outfield of the baseball diamond at Legend Park. We have no field the size and graded for as a football field.
Well, we have,
Which would
last
double as
year
a soccer.
practicing in front of Zern Building Products
Yeah,
on their grassland right there along Ryan Road.
yeah. So this all begs the question, when are we going to redo the corp? And Heath is going to come out of his chair at me because he's in the middle of the UDO project.
Yeah.
So, this, ooh, I got the.
And we also need to update the comprehensive master
Comprehensive
plan.
master
It's a
plan.
master.
So, anyway, so we digress, but you got what you need? You want something else?
We got direction.
We got direction. I think sorry, Jackie, go ahead.
Nope, please continue, Brian.
I was just going to point to one page towards the back because it seems to hit almost exactly what we're talking about here. It is on page 14 of the report, recommendations for future consideration. Number one, updating the city subdivision ordinance to include a dedication and trying to get development to dedicate land as part of their platting process, as opposed to paying fees. So that in essence, you're delivering the parks with the neighborhoods, targeted right at the neighborhoods of need. Second is, what we just talked about, update the corp. Make sure that it aligns with what the city goals are today, not 2005. Then update the official map to identify those locations as this is where we want to have a park and we're serious about it. And then go to try to buy those, because as you said earlier, trying to buy parks after development is already in full swing, gets very expensive and difficult. The best way to identify a park is early, before development's there. You'll get the best pricing and you have the best pick of which sites you want to put them on. And then the final piece, is considering trail development as a priority. But really these four kind of fall pretty closely to what we were just talking about, or listening to what you were talking about. And so I think those are good directions to kind of help, conversations coming out of this in the future, and really help kind of address that question of, well, is the corp the right direction? Is implementing the corp the key component, or should we be updating the corp? I think sounds like the backdrop of a lot of the conversation.
People don't think I read this. You can't see it, but there's lines on this page. This needs to have some consultation with Marion because I don't know what our subdivision ordinance is. And we do need to reflect on, consider a policy that places preference on dedication of land rather than payment. I'm not sure that those two are exclusive of each other, because we
They're not.
want to dedicate it, but
You
we
can do
also
both.
may want to pay for it. We also may have to pay for it.
Yes.
I don't know what legal impact our official map has on any of this. I don't know that I've ever seen our official map other than what exists today in the city. It's not a forward-looking document.
Well, the official map is actually established in state statutes, and it can be a very powerful tool for future planning if you choose to use it.
Official maps are generally designed so that if somebody comes in with a development and you have like a roadway or something that you want absolutely through that area, you can simply tell them this is where we want to put that. It gives you the opportunity to advocate for an actual design that matches what you're trying to get done. So it depends on roads, parks, and any
Trails.
other kind of, any trails, any kind of type of facility. You put them on an official map and it sort of locks them in a little bit.
And Mayor, a lot of other communities will use in their subdivision ordinance a two-step process on parks when it comes to a platting stage for development. They set it into two buckets. One is a fee in lieu of dedication. So if you don't dedicate land for a park, and there's a standard that's set within their ordinance, then you are required to pay a fee. Effectively, that's what's happening now. However, that doesn't get you out of the second half of the fee, which is park improvement fees, so that you're both collecting money to implement a park. So if they give you land, they're also giving you money to improve it. If they don't give you land, they're giving you money to go buy land. And it flows in two directions. And so there are models out there of ordinances that approach development that way, such that you're not in a situation of having to go out and buy large amounts of land within a neighborhood. It comes when the neighborhood gets developed.
And you should know that I negotiate for the land to be given to the city, which doubles up as our match payment. So anyway, but my statements earlier were kind of a subtle way of saying your terminology and your recommendations and report need to match what the city has. We don't have a subdivision ordinance, and we don't.
We have land division regulations in the UDO.
It's the Unified Development Ordinance, and we don't really use our official map for that function. What else? Anything?
Just to tell the commission what the next steps are. So the consultants are going to compile the commentary from this evening. We also would like to deploy a tool to rank the options that have been presented to the commission. So Parks Commission has already reviewed this material, and then the next step is that Common Council will have a similar public input session. And during the timeframe that that's all happening, we'll send out a survey where each of you can rank the different scenarios in terms of like, do I really want to prioritize a neighborhood park and trails? Which of these looks best to me? With an avenue for you to give more commentary. So Parks Commission, Plan Commission, and Common Council will all be receiving that survey from August 6th to 20th. So, and then once the input has been completed, then the draft will circulate back again so that we can start to use some of the decision-making tools that we're crafting now. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You want to hang?
Again,
for
thank you to
this
everybody.
section?
What was it?
You want to stay for the next item?
Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep. Have a good night.
Okay. No action is needed on that particular item because we gave action in our comments, mostly my comments. But I think I engaged everybody in the commission, so that's good. Next item is D3, my request for changing how we publicly notice hearings and other things. Mr. Planning Manager.
Yeah, after the last meeting, we came back and worked on some mock-up ideas, some exhibits. The first three exhibits apply to modifications to the mailed public notice that we send to the adjacent property owners that are within 500 feet, not 300 feet, as I may have otherwise stated. The first exhibit is basically a nothing fancy version, which does include a map on the back end so you can see where the property is located. That is the source of the reason for the public hearing notice. This one doesn't go to a whole lot of great shakes, just gives the basic meeting details, hearing location, who's the applicant, the location by address and tax key number, and then a basic description of the proposal. The mayor provided, each of you should have a copy of this. It's a one-sheet version of this that identifies ways to maybe clean up the descriptions to make them a little less jargony. A little.
This essentially is just a reorganization of our existing.
That's basically it. It just formats it differently and adds the map. So it's meant to be a little bit easier on the eyes or I guess easier on the eyes so that people can see it generally, but it doesn't really change a whole lot of the verbiage.
Which is why I put it on the stack.
Yeah. Exhibit number 2 is a version that mirrors what Oak Creek was doing with their notices. I did this version, and it does the same thing, except it puts it in a format that is easier. It includes the meeting details in a separate box with a little different color scheme on the bottom, and then includes the map on the back. Again, provides some basic kinds of information, contact information, and any kind of needs that you might have for ADA per ADA compliance, and so on. I asked our intern to look at those, and she came up with the alternate version, Exhibit 3, which takes the same 2 boxes and puts them side by side, which probably is actually going to be easier to implement if we use it, just because it doesn't require us to have to watch the formatting whenever we're doing this, because it's all in one box. And then same thing with the map on the back. Exhibit 4, this came up in the discussion last month about creating a post-it sign on the property of the notice. So we actually go out there and post a sign, or we ask the applicant to take this sign, put it on a stake or put it on a metal frame or something and stick it on the property so that you can have this. Regulo came up with this version. The only comment we got from our intern was you might want to change the color because red is kind of an anger-inducing color. something like a green or blue or something a little, anything that's on the other side of the color scale that's a little cooler and calms people down. But that's the basic notion. We don't even have to put the words application on here. We could just say, you know, this is a notice public hearing for this property. Any questions, call here, and that's basically it. Doesn't have to get all that complicated. You put too many details on a sign on a property, and people sometimes get distracted and do stuff in their cars.
I like this. I work with you on graphically laying it out different.
Okay.
I think application would be the wrong word if you wanted some kind of identifier.
Yeah.
I would just put file or ID or something like that. And then graphically, I'd do some other things. But I think this is important.
Yes.
Commissioner Haley.
I think we need to put a date and a time on there
Okay.
as to, you know, when the public hearing is, but it's good.
I agree in philosophy, but in practicality, I'd question that because I think what we want to do is make this such that DPW doesn't have to get involved a lot. This would be like a big, well, 4 times the size of a no parking sign, but the identifier probably is max that we want to change on it, because I want it to be able to, Heath say regular, we'll put these out on. And
Yeah, what we're really trying to do is just trying to get people's attention that, hey, this property has a public hearing, call us. We're trying to get people, encourage people to contact somebody so we can,
If that's what you want, if you want every person who's interested in that to call you, that's the way to
if
do it.
if they're interested.
Date and the time, they might just show up and not call you, but
Well, yeah,
don't wanna-
but I understand that too. We're also trying not to put so much information on that sign that we encourage people to crash into
fully understood.
curbs and everything else. The other exhibit, the last exhibit, this is sort of again, this goes back to our exhibit 1. This is the same thing as the posted notice that would go to South Now for publication. The big difference is that it's formatted in such a way that it's got spaces and so on. So it's similar to what we do now, it just, we organize it a little bit differently and take the legal description out of it. So we don't get bogged down with all that. I noted in the memo that I went back and looked at the Rogoshinsky area exception application public notice, and the reason why I bring it up is because we actually had a property owner, adjacent property owner call us up and say, why are you giving me a public notice telling me I have to take my garage down? And it didn't occur to them, and it took Gail about 10 minutes to work through what they were saying, what they're referring to, and then once she got through, she's like, oh, that's the adjacent property owners looking to take their garage down and put up a larger one. That's what they're trying to do. And they got so confused by what they were reading that they had no idea, that they were utterly confused. So the whole goal here, hopefully, is that we reduce confusion and make it a little bit easier for the average citizen, average resident to be able to read these. Looking
why I proposed
looking for input.
what I proposed.
Yeah.
I don't object to this. You took this and took I don't want to do this,
Okay.
but I don't object to this if it stays. But where you say proposal, not be that, but be this.
Yeah.
Which one is this? This is Chris Boudet's. I have that example here. The applicant is proposing new signage that exceeds current ordinance size by X number of percent on the Mosh Sports Complex building, Ballpark Commons. Planning Commission may recommend changes to the proposal, approve a new proposal, or deny it. Instead of that paragraph. Who the heck cares about UDO?
And I
Include that, and I did here by putting the citations, but not in the body of the description. Separate that out. So, comments? Sure. Commissioner Haley?
Couple, we'll go right through them. Generally, on all of them, or whichever one we take, I think it's helpful for the public if we actually have active links to the file for this, instead of telling people to go to the city's website and filter through. Just it's not too much effort to put the actual link in there and let them click and go. I think that will help with many of these things. The other, go ahead.
But it's just paper. I mean, we mail the paper, so,
You'd have to put a QR code.
yeah.
Good catch.
Yeah.
There you go. Or actually just have the path to that link, but we're forcing them to go to the city's website and filter on through, however we can make that more convenient. Again, I think that'll help reduce the number of calls coming in. The other observation is on, depending where we go, there's a lot of white space. And the potential to actually put the legal description on in most cases, you got a backside, you got areas down here, unless it's one of these 3 paragraphers, you could actually have the legal in here and not force people to call or come down to view it. I know what we're trying to get away from and having to do it, but there may be, in most situations, where it takes nothing. It's a 3-sentence legal description, and you put it on, and then we've met that compliance.
But my counter to that,
Yeah.
you're a smart guy that's been dealing with this for 40 years. The average constituent has no clue what the legal description is or means or how to read it. And I gotta tell you, I'll be brutally honest, I have no clue how to read that. And I've been doing this for 20 some odd years.
It gets even more confusing if you've got an applicant who, and I have one, who submitted his legal description, which consisted of this lot from this CSM, and then this lot for this CSM, and then this lot from this CSM, and they're not all linked. So we had to make him go back to his engineer and say, you got to write a new one that actually does the whole thing, because right now it's a jumbled mess. So we have applicants that are challenged by doing legal descriptions when it really shouldn't be that hard. So.
Just a couple on this one here, and again, I understand these are all drafts, but this is addressing the rock.
Yep.
And so we're showing the entire parcel in KID district. It would be nice if inside you could show the impacted sub-parcel.
Yeah, that one.
Like that, that's exactly what.
Yeah,
because I look at
that was a,
Well, it's somewhere out there, but what is it?
yeah, but,
I see where it is, and I go, oh, that's the other side of the street, I don't care.
yeah. Now,
And-
this is our intention. We're going to be doing this rather than that, because that map is too big.
I think you want to delete the chart for the zoning, unless you're going to show the zoning.
Yeah, no, we're planning on doing something like this. Is the thing that Gail punches out for us on
Like that.
on the form.
My comment on this, though, is all of the different colors makes it kind of weird. If you could,
Well, she's doing that because she's attaching the transparency version of the Jones zoning map.
zoning map,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, in this case, it doesn't really work all that well because it's supposed to be for a building that doesn't even show up on the aerial yet. It's-
But it is
just
on Google Map.
yeah,
So, this is all stuff we can work out, but Google Maps is better than using ours, cadastral maps and all that.
Okay.
Commissioner Leo?
So generally, I like Exhibit 3, the side-by-side setting. I think it's just draws attention to what we want to discuss. However, as Commissioner Haley brought up, adding the URL on the back page, right next to where it says contact and additional info, put a colon in there and then put the URL on there where it goes directly to the application. And then an or and a QR code right underneath. Not everybody is going to know how to do a QR code, but you can have
Right.
either or. I think with the space that you have available. I do like the map, the larger map, but maybe if possible, and I know it might get constrained on space, have a map inside a map. That's not the right way to put it, but the larger map so that if somebody's looking at it, they can see the whole area, and then the smaller with the, where it highlights where exactly it is on there. So a subset map, I guess, is the right way to put it.
Okay.
And then regarding Exhibit 4, do agree with the mayor that graphically this has got to be cleaned up a bit to have on there. Honestly, if I looked at this, even without all the red, I would think that it's some kind of foreclosure coming on that property. So that would definitely need, to be more clear that it's about an application versus some sort of negative action on that property.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, we don't have to reinvent this wheel. Just about every other community does this. Commissioner Haley.
Thank you. I had one other thought. When we do the aerial photograph, if we can zoom to the extent that any property within 200 feet of the boundary shows, so that people, who are 2 houses down might not see themselves there, but if it includes everything within the 200 feet, they can say, there's my property, and now I get it, the relationship.
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, so do you want to offer?
I would agree for the most part. Exhibits 2 and 3 were the ones that caught my eyes the most, especially with the side-by-side on 3. I think that, I know Commissioner Haley had mentioned the white space, but I think having the open space kind of directs your focus to the meeting details and the proposal summary. And adding the URL link or the QR code is, if someone wants to dig into more detail, I think that gives them the option right there to do it, rather than trying to jam more stuff into here. I know speaking with Glenn about this, I think he said it was about $200 a sign. So yeah, I think the intent was to make them once and use them as like a continuous thing rather than make an individual one for each thing.
Yep. So I get a consent, I don't know, Commissioner Leon.
Just want to clarify one thing for adding a URL and a QR. So I didn't maybe say it right. The word "or" would be in there to say you can go to this URL or to this QR, but I definitely meant having both available on there.
I'm not, I think this is just the preference of the commission, and we can go ahead and do this without an action. City Attorney?
Don't believe any requirement are.
Yeah. It's just, we're just looking for guidance on what your preference is.
Okay, so my take is that everybody likes Exhibit 3. Okay, so Exhibit 3, add the QR, add the URL
Okay.
as a "or," and some changes on the maps to make them, that'll vary by application. So just to make sure that we make it, the identity of the location very clear. Then I need commissioners' comments as to whether you felt my examples were what you were looking for. And these are different, these are not one example, these are not 3 different versions of one example, these are 3 different examples. Here, Patrick.
Yes, thank you.
So without objection, the base of all of this is Exhibit 3 and Exhibit 4. Exhibit 4 gets graphically cleaned up. And I don't know that we even need to know applications, because they'll call you and say, it's on Loomis Road there. And we'll know, right? Let's say, if they were hanging this out for Boday's thing, what's that big building on Loomis in Ballpark Commons? That would be suitable for you, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
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 Exactly. And we'll make up a few because, a bear project. So,
Well, and you'll also need extras because there's inevitably going to be that person that decides that, hey, I can get a free souvenir.
there'll be a few of those. So the description type, we have what's on the exhibit, which I think is okay, but it's kind of too technical. Or it's not worded, it's worded like a planner wrote it, which isn't bad, but the rest of us are not.
Yeah, I'm totally in favor of writing it as if the average person is supposed to read it rather than writing it with a jargon. They don't need to know what the term is per se, they just need to know what they're basically asking for.
8th grade reading.
Yeah.
Just like your tax return.
Don't put that on.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Leon?
Just to make sure you're saying 1, 2, or 3. It's one of those, correct?
No,
okay.
that's a style
Okay.
sheet more than, if I took some time and thought about this before I did it, I would have done 3 of them with 3 examples,
Okay.
but I didn't do that. So shame on me. But you see, one is a easy sign thing, the other one's a subdivision, and the other one we'll never use, but I've had CSM in my head at that time, so I did a CSM kind of, even though we don't do public hearings. So, okay, any objections? So we'll try to write them like this. In Exhibit 3, add QR and URL, and the maps will try to be even clearer. I don't object to white space, though. So, okay, there is no formal action on that. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Leon and Haley, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everybody. Progress.
Recording stopped.